All right, so have you ever thought about political parties and pressure groups? You know, they're kind of like the essential parts of any democracy, but have you ever really stopped to think about like what they are, how they work?
Yeah.
So in this deep dive, we're going to be looking at this academic text that goes deep into these institutions, how they're defined, the different types, and, you know, how they actually function in the real world.
Yeah, you know, it's fascinating because just understanding these groups can really unlock a lot about how power flows in a democracy. You know, how citizens make their voices heard, how decisions get made that affect all of our lives.
Yeah. I mean, just think about it. Like, why do some countries have a ton of political parties while others have just two?
Right.
And then how do these groups that aren't even like in the government, these pressure groups, how do they manage to sway the people in charge?
It's like we're peeking behind the curtain to see all the gears turning, and sometimes those gears turn in some surprising ways.
Yeah. So let's start with the most visible players. You know, we see them, we hear their slogans, political parties.
Right.
But like, what exactly makes a group a political party?
Well, the core idea is pretty straightforward. A political party is a group of people who share a set of beliefs about how the government should be run. And their main goal is to get their members elected to office so they can put those beliefs into action.
So it's not just about like shouting your opinions. It's about having a strategy to actually get your people in positions of power.
Exactly. And it's interesting to think about this in the context of Nigeria. Take the People's Democratic Party, for example. They dominated for years after the return to democracy in 1999. And their ability to recruit candidates, especially at the local level, was really a key part of their success.
Yeah, but then things shifted, right? The All Progressives Congress emerged, and they were able to mobilize a different set of voters and ultimately win the presidency in 2015.
Precisely. And that shift in power just shows how the political landscape is always evolving, and parties have to adapt to stay relevant.
So are there different types of systems that these parties operate in?
Absolutely. The source material breaks down party systems into three main types. So you have the one-party system, which is like a one-man show. Think of countries like North Korea or Cuba, where a single party just controls everything. There's not a lot of competition or voter choice.
That makes sense.
Right.
Then there's the two-party system, which is more like this constant tug of war between two major players.
Yeah, Canada and Great Britain are classic examples. So in these systems, power tends to swing back and forth between those two dominant parties. And interestingly, Nigeria actually experimented with a two-party system during its Third Republic in the early 1990s.
Oh, right, with the Social Democratic Party and the National Republican Convention.
Exactly.
That was a pretty turbulent time, though, wasn't it?
It was, and ultimately it didn't last.
Okay. Which brings us to the most common type, right?
Yes.
The multi-party system.
That's the one. It's like a vibrant marketplace of ideas with multiple parties competing for votes. You know, India and, of course, present-day Nigeria are great examples.
Yeah, and with so many parties, I imagine things can get pretty chaotic. How do things actually get done in those systems?
Well, it definitely adds a layer of complexity. You often see coalitions forming where parties have to compromise and work together to get anything passed. That can be seen as both a strength and a weakness.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
It sounds like having so many voices at the table could lead to, you know, more diverse representation, but it might also make it harder to achieve, you know, real progress on specific issues.
Yeah, it's a balancing act for sure. But regardless of which system a country has, political parties have a huge responsibility in a democracy.
Okay, so let's break down those responsibilities, because it's not just about, you know, getting elected and then kicking back, right?
No, not at all. They play a crucial role in setting the agenda for public debate. They identify the key issues that need to be addressed and then articulate what they believe are the best solutions.
So they're like framing the conversation, you know, putting forward those big ideas for people to think about.
Precisely. And they also play a big part in educating citizens about the political system and you know, their role in it. Think about all those rallies and campaign speeches. They're not just trying to win votes. They're trying to get people informed and engaged in the process.
Yeah, it's like they're trying to make it all make sense, you know, or at least make it feel like it's related to our lives.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. And let's not forget the logistical side of things too. Parties are the ones who are recruiting and training those candidates for office. That's no small feat, especially in a country as large and diverse as Nigeria.
I imagine there's a lot of behind the scenes stuff going on, you know, when it comes to choosing, you know, who will represent the party.
Absolutely. And that selection process can have a huge impact on what policies are prioritized, how effective the government can be. You know, a party might have the best ideas in the world, but if they don't have the right people to implement them, it's all for nothing.
So we've got these parties constantly, you know, jockeying for position, trying to shape the agenda, get their people elected. But then there's this other force at play, these pressure groups.
Right.
And they're not vying for office themselves. So what's their game?
Pressure groups, sometimes called interest groups, are fascinating because they represent a different kind of power dynamic. They're not trying to run the whole show. They just want to influence specific aspects of it.
So instead of trying to control the whole government, they're more like specialists. They're focused on particular issues or causes.
Exactly. They could be advocating for anything from better healthcare to environmental protection to educational reform. And they come in all shapes and sizes.
Right. And we see this all the time in Nigeria. You've got groups like ASUU, you know, they've been a powerful voice for university lecturers. And then there's the NLC, which represents a broad spectrum of workers across various industries.
And let's not forget about groups like the NBA, the Nigerian Bar Association, and the NUJ. They're all focused on protecting the interests of their members and shaping those policies that are related to their specific fields.
So how do these pressure groups actually exert their influence? Because they don't have the same formal power as political parties. So what tools are they using?
That's where things get really interesting. Pressure groups have to be strategic and creative in how they approach things. They can't just rely on winning elections. They have to find other ways to make their case and get those in power to pay attention.
Yeah, I imagine public awareness campaigns are a big part of it, getting their message out to the masses, and building public support for their cause.
Absolutely. Think of the environmental movement, for example. Groups like Greenpeace have been so effective at raising awareness about climate change and putting pressure on governments and corporations to take action. They've staged these dramatic protests, released those hard-hitting reports, and used social media to mobilize people around the world.
And sometimes those protests can really capture the public's imagination and turn an issue into a national conversation.
Another key strategy for pressure groups is lobbying. Now, the word lobbying sometimes gets a bad rap, but it's essentially about trying to persuade decision makers to see things your way.
So it's about building relationships with politicians and presenting, well-researched arguments and trying to win them over to your side.
You got it.
So they're not just focused on their own narrow interests, they're also looking at the bigger picture and pushing for changes that would benefit the economy as a whole.
Exactly. And that's something you see with a lot of pressure groups. They understand that their success often depends on aligning their interests with broader societal goals.
Now, besides lobbying and public awareness campaigns, are there other strategies that pressure groups use?
Oh, absolutely. One tactic that can be quite effective is litigation. Taking legal action can be a way to challenge government decisions, force a change in policy, or even set a legal precedent that benefits their cause. And sometimes pressure groups even get involved in the electoral process, either by endorsing candidates who align with their views or by campaigning against those they see as harmful to their cause.
It's like they're trying to influence the outcome of elections to ensure that the people in power are more likely to be sympathetic to their agenda.
Exactly. And while they might not have the same resources as political parties, they can still play a significant role in shaping the political landscape by mobilizing their members and supporters to vote for or against certain candidates.
So pressure groups have this whole toolbox of strategies at their disposal. It's fascinating how they've learned to adapt and innovate to make their voices heard in a system that's not always designed to give them a seat at the table.
Yeah, it really shows the power of collective action.
Yeah.
And how even those groups, outside of the formal structures can make a difference.
It strikes me that we've been talking about political parties and pressure groups as if they're these separate things.
Right.
But there's actually a lot of overlap and interaction between them, isn't there?
Absolutely. It's more like a dance than, two separate performances.
Okay.
Sometimes they cooperate, sometimes they clash, and sometimes they even blur the lines.
I'm curious about that blurring of the lines.
Yeah.
Can you give us an example? How does that actually play out?
Well, think about how pressure groups can influence the agendas of political parties. Let's say a pressure group dedicated to affordable housing is, gaining traction. They're raising public awareness about the issue.
Yeah.
Suddenly, political parties start incorporating affordable housing into their platforms and campaign promises because they realize it's an issue that voters care about.
So it's not just about direct lobbying, it's about shaping the conversation, influencing, the very issues that these parties focus on.
Exactly. And sometimes the relationship goes even deeper.
Okay.
Individuals who, cut their teeth in advocacy working within pressure groups might later on transition into formal politics.
Right.
They might run for office themselves, bringing their passion and expertise.
So it's like a pipeline.
Yeah.
From, grassroots activism to the corridors of power.
And of course, there are times when pressure groups become a real thorn in the side of political parties, challenging their decisions and holding them accountable for their promises.
That watchdog role seems crucial. I mean, we see it all the time, right? Environmental groups pushing back against policies that threaten our ecosystems, human rights groups calling out abuses of power, consumer advocacy groups demanding greater transparency and fairness.
Yeah. It's all about making sure that political parties don't become complacent, that they remain responsive to the needs and concerns of the people they represent. And, in a democracy, that tension, that push and pull between those in power and those advocating for change, it's actually a healthy sign.
It's like they act as a counterbalance. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I keep coming back to this idea that democracy is not a spectator sport.
Right.
It thrives on the active participation of its citizens.
That's such a vital point. And understanding the roles of political parties and pressure groups can help us see how we can get involved, how we can make our voices heard, how we can, shape the decisions that affect our lives.
Yeah.
So, as you go about your day, think about this. Which political parties resonate with your values? Are there any pressure groups working on issues you care about? How can you lend your voice, your energy, your expertise to these causes?
Because ultimately, we're not just observers in this grand experiment. We're the authors of our own political destinies, and we have the power to write a story, of progress, justice, and a future that we can all be proud of.